This is Q13 News This Morning with Kaci and Travis.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for being with us this morning. I'm Travis Mayfield.
And I'm Kaci Aitchison. Here's what we're focusing on this half hour. Washington, D.C. consumed with what President Donald Trump knew, when, and did he really obstruct justice? But are we missing the real danger? Coming up, a case for us to turn some of our attention elsewhere.
Also, did that last headline that Kaci just read for you make you anxious, make something pit your stomach happen? Yeah.
Politics of any kind.
It turns out political debate is literally sending more and more people to the doctor's office. Why? And what you can do to keep yourself healthy after this.
Interesting. Plus, plants are growing, cracks are appearing on ice shelves across Antarctica, but things may actually be much worse than we thought. The story of the melting continent ahead, so we can get anxious about that.
Yeah, great. It's lovely. And, because, let's just talk more about things like that. Should you lie to your kids? Maybe about Antarctica melting. I don't know. What do you think? Tyler's taking your comments on Facebook, and then we're going to ask an expert for their advice. As I said before, I'm taking notes on this.
I think we all need to take notes on that story. But first, it is Pride Weekend in Western Washington. It's a time when the LGBTQ community celebrates all the advances made in equality since the Stonewall riots in the summer of 1969 in New York City.
But this is a thing. What if one word in one newspaper could have advanced all that equality decades earlier? If only it hadn't been banned from print.
Interesting. Well, this column published in the New York Times this week tells the remarkable story of how the Times gave gay its own voice again.
Yeah, so in this piece, as you mentioned, the staff lays out that in the early 70s, the newspaper was reporting pretty extensively on gay issues, hearing from authentic gay voices. And then a travel writer wrote a piece about a gay cruise that offended the family that owned the New York Times. And the word gay was banned from the newspaper's pages.
So the paper avoided the topic at nearly all costs, often throughout the 1980s, only reporting on gay issues through the AIDS epidemic.
But then in 1987, an editor just made the call and said, gay is back. The word is back. With a simple change, the faces and the lives of the LGBTQ community actually found new voice, and it was a powerful one in the New York Times.
But the thing is, the writer of this particular history piece wonders aloud about an alternate world where the paper kept fearlessly sharing the lives of sexual minorities. Now, if they'd done it earlier, how might it have hastened the fight to end AIDS? How might it have opened up the coming out process earlier? And ultimately, how might it have spurred marriage for all years sooner? So a lot of interesting things coming out of that.
Yeah, really interesting story for sure. But speaking of being truthful and being truthful about who you are, what about lying to your kids?
I don't know.
It's tough.
And this is something that I know you deal with.
Yes. And so should we teach our kids that we do lie? Is it okay to lie to our kids? Sometimes it feels like it's a necessity. Will your kids get stuck if you do lie to them? I mean, things like, oh, your eyes are going to get stuck open if you don't stop doing that. Or I'm going to call the police if you don't clean your room.
I'm sorry, but I still think my mom has eyes in the back of her head, literally. So where is the line? When is it okay to lie to your kids, and when does it cross a line of some kind? Joining us this morning is Dr. Elizabeth Mead, a pediatrician at Swedish Medical Center. Good morning.
Hi.
Now, maybe I should start by asking, is it okay to lie to your kids?
The very short answer is not really, but the nuanced answer is there are times when it's probably fine.
Okay, so let's start there.
Yeah.
How do I know the difference?
When do you lie to your child, Travis?
It's a spectrum.
So I think, in moments of crisis or when kids are really feeling unsafe, it's okay to say things like, everything's going to be fine, we're all going to be okay. The most important thing is to make sure that your child is reassured and they feel safe and comfortable. I think there's also a lot of differences depending on the developmental stage and the age of the child. So telling your 3-year-old that Santa comes and brings presents at Christmas is really different than if your 8 or 9-year-old comes to you and says, I don't believe in Santa, I know it's you, tell me the truth.
What about when it comes to kids asking you personal questions about yourself? Because one of the things as you grow up is you slowly start to realize your parents had a life before you came along, which is
they're actual people.
Very jarring.
Yeah.
How do you handle those questions? Because they might ask you, did you drink alcohol before you turned 21? And answers like that. What do you?
In general, honestly, I think the best thing is to be honest and truthful with your kids, because the reality is that's what you want them to do with you. And so the more that you can kind of model that behavior and set up an expectation that family members are honest with each other about stuff, the better. I do think if there's something really personal or something you don't want to talk about with your child, it's actually okay to say, that's not something I'm going to talk about with you right now, or this isn't a subject that parents and kids really discuss.
It's also okay to limit the details.
Sure.
I mean, right? I mean, I don't have to talk about wild times in college. I can say, yes, I did it and I actually regret it, or yes, I did it and we'll talk about that as you grow up. But I don't have to go into the
Exactly.
specifics.
I mean, yeah, they don't need like a life history of everything we've done in our lives, right? But I think generalisms like that, you know, it was something that I did, or I did it once and I didn't like it, I regretted it, and here's why. You know, I think that being honest with your kids, but also framing it in a way that's appropriate for their age is really important.
How do you pivot from that, though? Let's say you do have to tell one of the lies that you're talking about when they're younger, and then they get older and they go, wait a minute. Hey, wait a second. You told me this when I was this age.
Yeah.
Why, you know, how do you handle, you know, pivoting a little bit?
You know, I think with things that create sort of a magical childhood experience like Santa, like the Easter Bunny, like whatever it is that you believe in, at some point it's okay to say to your child, especially if they ask you, you know, there comes a time when they're hearing it from other people, to say, well, this is really why we did those things. It's part of our tradition, or it's really fun for us to do. I think that if there's something more serious that you've lied to your child about and you want to come clean, just sitting them down and saying, you know, I really wasn't comfortable talking about this with you at that age, but now I feel like you're older, you're more mature, and you can really understand, and I want to tell you a little bit more about it.
So let's be clear, the Easter Bunny and Santa do exist. There's
Obviously.
no doubt about it. But
Obviously.
is there a point where you're teaching your kids like dishonesty? I mean, is there any worry about trust between parent and child when it comes to this?
I think there are some things you really shouldn't lie to kids about. So I think big, important life events like divorce, like a parent's illness or death in the family, or you're moving to another state, you know, you really want to be honest with your kids in a way that's appropriate for their age pretty early on so they have time to process and discuss it with you. I think never lie to your kids about their bodies or kind of the sex, drugs, and rock and roll conversation, because again, we want those kids to feel comfortable talking to us and telling us the truth. So there are big categories where I think it's not a good idea to lie to them, for sure.
Dr. Elizabeth Mee with Swedish Medical Center, thank you. That makes it a lot clearer in our minds, for sure.
I hope so.
It helps.
Thank you.
It helps a lot.
We appreciate it. Turning now to another story, special counsel Robert Mueller continues his investigation into how Russia worked to disrupt the 2016 presidential election and whether there was any collusion between foreign agents at President Trump's campaign and with campaign officials. Now, in recent weeks, the focus has been on the president himself. Did he obstruct justice, firing the former FBI director, Jim Comey? Is he considering firing Robert Mueller himself? What's next inside the White House? Honestly, all of those questions have just continued to inflame Washington, D.C., but are we really paying attention to the right thing? A Politico magazine piece we spotted this week argues we are focused on the wrong thing. Forget Comey, reads the headline. The real story is Russia's war on America. The piece, written by a former advisor to the presidents of Georgia and Moldova, who knows a lot about foreign policy and specifically this region of the world, argues we're actually falling into a trap cleverly laid by Russian President Vladimir Putin. The piece has three main arguments. The first is that no matter what Robert Mueller may find in this investigation, America has already been weakened simply because we are more fractured now and more inward-looking than ever before, and before the Russians may have begun to influence our election. Second, Russia itself has already forced some change to long-standing American policies in the process, fundamentally hurting some of our relationships with our allies and how those allies even see us. Think about how Europe views us, for example, or those in Asia. And third, it will happen again, argues this columnist. In fact, it may already be happening now, and the American public doesn't even know about it because, well, probably the intelligence community hasn't fully realized the new kinds of attack. Now, the author, Molly McCune, ends this piece by saying, we're at war, writing in part, the war is in the shadows, and right now Russia is winning. There's only one question that we should be asking. What are we going to do to protect the American people from Russians' acts of war?
Wow, there's a lot to unpack there for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. It's worth a read if you can check it out on Politico.
Definitely. Well, there are 7 continents on this planet, as hopefully you are aware, but what if we were entering a new period in the Earth's existence in which we're losing one of them? The July issue of the National Geographic magazine here hit newsstands this week, and in a special report, the renowned magazine is taking readers inside secret Antarctica and showing all of us the bottom of the world as you've never seen it. Amidst the incredible photographs and reporting, there is this rather frightening story rates right here. Antarctica is melting, and giant ice cracks are just the start. We've been tracking a giant crack in the Larsen Sea ice shelf. You can see it here. It's speeding toward the sea. When that happens, an ice mass the size of Delaware will shear off, and that could literally happen any day. But National Geographic is tracking similar cracks and glacial melts all across western Antarctica. In fact, one team of scientists have found that the amount of ice disappearing from Antarctic ice shelves increased 12-fold between 1994 and 2012, from 6 cubic miles to 74 cubic miles every year. That means if conditions remain as they are today, we'll likely see melting and cracking around the edges of the continent until 2050, and then from 2050 to 2100. Growing number of scientists believe the continental crumbling will have reached a point of no return.
I am
Have a nice
speechless.
day.
Yeah, I am genuinely speechless. I mean, I know we need to talk about these things.
But we had no idea it was that bad.
It is apparently that bad. Yes.
So definitely something. I mean, I think as long as we all keep ourselves educated and read up as much as we can as possible, nothing will hopefully come as such a huge surprise.
This I want to lie to my child about this.
I know, that's the problem.
But when is it okay to lie to your child? We just heard from Dr. Mead with some good answers.
Yes, great answers. And we're talking about that on our Facebook page. So Tyler, what are people saying?
A lot of responses rolling in. Kevin says, every parent does it at their own discretion. Terry says, don't lie, tactfully give them just enough information that they can handle. So we're going to take a look at more of your responses coming up.
I appreciate all the perspectives from parents, from the doctors, all of that when it comes to how to deal with whether you tell your kids the truth and when you tell your kids the truth.
And we'll have more coming up. And welcome back. We've been talking about lying to your kids. Is it okay to do that? And the kinds of conversations that you can have with them. And it brings to mind politics. That's another thing that has been in the news, well, since the beginning of time, but particularly in the last year or so.
Yeah, and the rhetoric is so heated right now that I certainly want to protect my daughter if we're in the car and the radio's on. Sometimes I'm like, let's just turn that down. Right. So I don't know. We actually wanted to bring Dr. Mead with Swedish Medical Center back in on this question about politics and anxiety. I mean, it certainly gives me a lot of heartburn.
Yeah.
I am kind of worried about my 3-year-old daughter being exposed to a lot of this stuff. What are the risks?
There's a lot going on. And I think even little kids who don't maybe understand the words that are being said, they're very, very susceptible to the tone in people's voices and the emotion that they feel. So even if they're hearing things on TV or radio and they don't really understand it, they can tell people are upset. And that can certainly create anxiety and kind of negative feelings in kids.
I wonder how it's possible as a parent to fully be aware of what your child is interpreting and absorbing. Because I was just this morning, someone on Facebook posted that their kid said something to them in the car and they had no idea they even knew what that term was. It was some political term and they ended up turning the channel over it. But then this parent was like, I don't know how long she's been wondering about this term because she didn't come to me. So how do you navigate that?
You ask your kids. I mean, I think this is the best thing no matter what age they are. You can ask them, what do you know about what's going on? Do you have any concerns? Are you worried about anything? What's really good that's happening in the world? Because we want to balance that out, right? So if they say, I think that everyone hates each other and this is a terrible time, then I think it's really good to counter that with telling them stories and good things that are happening in other places too.
So before the break, we asked you about when it's okay to lie to your kids, and you basically said there's not a good time, really, truthfully. So what about in politics? I mean, is there something here that, like, how much protection of our kids and how much transparency?
You know, again, I think like we talked about before, if you're telling your kids things to make them feel safe, that's pretty much always okay. So I think the more that you can make them feel reassured and say to them, like, you know, we're still a family unit, we love each other, we're going to be fine. Those are good messages to give to your kids. I think the most important thing you can do, especially for younger kids, is really to try to shield them as much as possible. So don't have the news on in the background, don't have the radio on to the news station in the car if they're there. Try to protect them as much as you can. There's still going to be things that filter in, but I think not inundating kids with these negative messages is really key to kind of preventing the issue in the first place.
I think another interesting aspect of this is that kids, as they get older, are trying to form their own opinions and their own beliefs about things. And I know that parents have told me it's really tough to navigate. When do you help guide them versus stepping back? When it comes to politics, should you be discussing with your kids what your own personal politics are? And this is what we believe as a family, or are you trying to initiate a conversation that asks the child for their opinion first?
I think with older kids, it's great to ask for their opinion first. And there may be times when you and your kids don't agree. There probably will be times when you don't agree, right? And so to take that in stride and just ask them to explain why they feel a certain way or what information they've heard or where are they getting this evidence. It's really different, I think, to say this is what I believe as a person and now tell me what you believe than to say this is what we believe as a family. Because you want your kids to feel free to have their own beliefs and develop their own belief systems. You want them to have the same values that you have, right? And you want to instill that in them. But I think allowing them some room to sort of grow their own opinions is also really important.
Which leads me to my question. In my house growing up, we had pretty loud and vociferous debates.
We did too.
I mean, great. Honestly, to be truthful, it was my dad and my sister and I, but my mom would get very worried that we didn't like each other. So how do you have a healthy debate, or is that healthy, I guess?
I think it's healthy as long as all the parties involved are respectful of each other. And this is really the key in any relationship, in any discussion. We have really heated debates in my family too. We all kind of believe the same thing, but we still like to debate the nuances of it. And it's good. I think it's good conversation. It makes us all more aware and better people. But I think the bottom line, again, is to treat the other person with respect, even if you don't agree with them. And if you start at that foundation, you're usually going to be okay.
I think what was difficult in my family about that is that we would open it up for conversation. And then as I got older, I could tell my parents had a difficult time knowing, because in the moment of debate, you're debating as equals.
Yeah.
Even though they're my parent, I'm their daughter. But there comes a time where they had to make that switch and go back to being my parent again. You know, that you can't talk that way to me. So how do you know when to make that switch? Because that can be really tough. That's a really tough one to navigate.
Again, I think that separation of values and politics is great. So, family values that you have, we don't swear at the dinner table or whatever it is. It's okay to lay down those ground rules, but I think allowing people to have opinions is also important.
I love all of this. I think you've been really helpful. Thank you for kind of helping ease the pit in my stomach.
Yes, thank you so much.
Politics in general, we do appreciate it, Dr.
No problem.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Still ahead, graduation time. That means a lot of graduation photos, but those can be really expensive. Up next, how one guy is actually helping hundreds of grads remember their special day.
Such a great positive story. And take a look at your screen for our weekend trivia. Travis and I have no idea what the answer is because our producer is mean. No, just kidding. We like to play along. So take a look and tell us what you think. We'll have the answer on the other side of this break.
All right, there it is. Take a look at your screen. This is the Friday trivia.
Say your guess. Don't be ashamed.
You're more likely to be late to a doctor's appointment if you do this for a living. I had to check to see if Dr. Mead was still in the studio before I answered this, but she said she had the same answer.
You thought it was doctor.
I did think it was doctor.
Mine was lawyer because lawyers know they can lie for a living and come up with a good excuse.
Ooh, you're gonna get email.
No, I don't mean, that's not what I meant. No.
Oh, wow.
No, I don't mean that they lie
said that,
on
not
purpose.
me.
No, I don't mean they lie on purpose. I mean that they train to. Oh, that was so bad. That's not what I mean. Some of my good friends are lawyers.
Ooh.
You don't.
How about if you just do the rest of the show by yourself? I am not.
I'm sorry. No, I'm so sorry.
Looking at an empty studio.
That just came out. That's not what I meant.
Casey did not mean that. There's no doubt about it.
They don't lie for a living. The more I say, the worse it's getting.
Don't even try. Just choose a different answer.
Can you just tell me what the answer is and
what
please
is it,
tell me
Felicia?
okay.
It's doctor.
This is a good example of why sometimes you should go with the crowd and not stand on your own and say what you think it is.
I always thought it was doctor. That's what I was going to say.
Well, I'm glad that you're on the right side.
I say that now that it's been revealed.
Thanks.
Oh, all right. Let's take a breath. We have a couple more stories to get to. It has been a busy few days. Making fun of lawyers.
I love lawyers. I respect lawyers. I've used lawyers, and they've never lied. You know what I mean? We all have to. We wanted to share a story on the brighter side. We've seen a lot of really fun high school graduation pictures, but what about people who can't afford them? They're so expensive.
This is a story that I just love. Luckily, a guy named Richard Waugh stepping in to help. Richard lives in Philadelphia. He says when he was younger, he just didn't have enough money to pay for graduation photos, but he wanted to give kids the opportunity that he never had.
So he posted this on Facebook. He said, quote, "I don't know what your story is and why you can't afford them, but if you truly can't afford high school graduation pictures and live in Philadelphia, we are allowing you to pay whatever you can afford for high school graduation pictures."
And he goes on to say, you made it. You've graduated from high school. God loves you, and he knows your struggle. He says he has a barber, and he has a makeup artist, and they all are going to help so that you look awesome in your photos.
And it makes you feel really good, too. His post has been shared more than 20,000 times, and the best part, other photographers are now chiming in saying they're willing to donate free photos in their area as well.
Other makeup artists and barbers also saying, yeah, me too, me too, me too. I love the, one kind thing that sparks another kind thing that sparks another kind
It's inspiring.
thing. Yeah.
And we have more in the positive news department. An Indiana couple's proposal picture is getting a lot of attention, but not because of the newly engaged couple.
So instead, a 5-year-old girl took the spotlight. Oh,
So sweet.
Grant met Cassandra, who's a single mom almost a year ago. He wanted to include Cassandra's daughter, Adriana, in the proposal.
So he took him for a walk in the woods and proposed. Now, after Cassandra agreed to marry him, Grant went back down on one knee to propose to Adriana with a heart-shaped necklace, asking if he could be her dad.
The little girl said, yes, I finally get a daddy.
Oh.
No wedding date yet, but Adriana gets to be the flower girl.
Look how happy she is.
I love it. And that adorable dress.
And it's just, they're going to be such a cute little family, and already are, really.
So,
We're back to lying, guys.
not about lawyers.
Not about
different
lawyers,
lies.
different lies.
Should you lie to your kids?
Well, should you?
I don't know.
When is it okay and when is it not okay?
We ask you on Facebook, so Tyler,
Yes.
let's hear, what are people saying?
There's
Come on
no
in.
middle ground here.
What?
So people are on one end of the spectrum
Okay.
all the time, or never.
Yeah.
Jerry says never. If there are things your kids should not know, tell them so. Because otherwise you're going to get a bigger problem, because then your kids are going to learn to lie to others. So that's his argument.
Yeah, that's a good argument.
Cheryl says, I think it depends on the situation and decide if your child is mature enough to deal with that information.
Yeah, good. But not lying. Basically
Right,
just
right.
withholding information.
Yeah, and then on the other end, Philip says, I do it all the time, and it makes life a lot harder because then you have to remember what you've lied about
Oh, true.
and follow that lie along to keep up the charade.
Yeah, that's why I'm bad at lying. I can't remember what I just said 4 minutes ago.
Yeah.
I certainly
right.
can't remember what I told my daughter.
It ends up being a lot more work.
Did your parents lie to you that you're aware of?
No.
I don't...
Honestly, I can't think of a...
Never thought about it before.
No, my parents didn't, but my grandparents did. They told me that an orange seed was planted in the ground, and that's how I came to be.
Oh.
Which was
Wait,
fine.
that's not true?
No, I'm sorry. That's for another show.
Oh.
But it's only awkward later when you have to realize, wait a minute, that wasn't true?
Yeah.
Which is something Dr. Mead said you need to think about if you're a parent.
You and John had conversations.
They were very awkward conversations.
Very awkward.
A lot was learned.
Oh, thank you, Tyler. Thank you, everybody, for being here. We're here Fridays, 9:30, and then every Saturday and Sunday, 6:30 a.m. on Joe TV.